Mr. and Ms. Internet, and all our ships at sea. This is the Freeway Forum, coming to you live and direct from the world-famous 405 Freeway in beautiful, sunny Southern California. My name is Atari. I'll be your host here for the next 20-30 minutes, however long it takes to get through this mind-boggling traffic. And speaking of mind-boggling, wow, man. So James Comey fired by President Trump. And despite your political leanings, whether, you think that Comey should have been fired because he inappropriately handled the Clinton investigation, whether you think Comey was fired because he was getting too close to the truth about Donald Trump's ties with Russia, it doesn't matter at this point. What does matter is the fact that he was fired. The timing is suspect, and we're seeing more and more circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial because, some of it's hard evidence, like Flynn. Flynn was hard evidence. This fucking, this stupid nutty shit with Trump and the Russian ambassadors, and he's just giving away intel. It's fantastic. Mr. President, yes, you have the prerogative legally, but is it such a good idea? I don't know. I don't think so. I certainly don't think so. Especially intel that compromises a trusted ally, and compromises human assets, human intelligence. Seems to be less and less of that in this field nowadays. Anyway, so regardless of how you feel about the system, regardless of how you feel about the Comey firing, you have to admit that it is a little suspect. You have to step back, take your partisan glasses off, and look at it and say, yeah, it might just be a little suspect. We're at the point here where we really need to get to the bottom of it. We need to know for certain, one way or the other. We need an independent investigation into these, alleged Russia ties. Really need to know what's going on here, because democracy dies in darkness. We're at this point where nobody trusts anybody. Nobody is trusting the government. Even within the government, nobody trusts each other. This is how it falls. This is how it ends. Until we can come together and we can start trusting each other, we're on a downward slope. And it's not about, the moral decline of America. Forget that nonsense. We're not on we're on much more than a moral decline here, and legislating morality is not going to help, y'all. What is going to help is us coming together and looking at each other and saying, you're an American, and we might disagree, but we're going to come together at some point and figure something out. For so long, I was talking to my boss about this. He's a small business owner. He's an entrepreneur. He's fairly conservative minded. Hates Trump. He hates Trump like a son of a bitch. But I was talking to him today, and we were talking about different things. He has a background in journalism. I have a background in political science and engineering, and of course aviation. But we're both like surfers, so it's like we can kind of bond, if you will, over that. And we both distrust the government. We both have issues with the government, whether it be a Democrat or a Republican in office. We just have different ideas on how to to do things. But, you know, we can respect each other. When it comes down to business, he's the boss, so, you know, I have my inputs, but whatever. Anyway, so we were talking about this, and I lost where I was going with that. This Russia stuff, yeah. About how, God dang, I just completely lost my train of thought. It's been one of those days, really. Spent most of the day in MacArthur Park in downtown Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles. It's not really downtown. I guess it's kind of downtownish. It's the old and busted part of downtown. Going out Wilshire to the west. Anyway, MacArthur Park, kind of run down. Kind of a dirty area. For various reasons. It is historically kind of a sketchy area, to say the least. Like Central Park was back in the day in New York. May still be, I guess. Anyway, here, this is what we're talking about. And he was like, why do you think there's so much division in, politics? And I said, honestly, as much as a proponent of the fair market as I am, I really think it comes down to when the Reagan administration's FCC essentially repealed, for lack of a better word, the Fairness Doctrine. Because up until that point, news media there was a regulatory imperative that news media present a balanced, fair, objective, unbiased, impartial presentation of controversial topics. And I believe that the abolition of the Fairness Doctrine really that was the linchpin, I think, that started us down this spiral of partisan media. He was talking about, cable news. And I'm like, yeah, cable news. Well, it all goes back to the Fairness Doctrine. Because no longer do you have to present both sides. You can editorialize all you want without the Fairness Doctrine in place. And that's what gave rise to conservative talk radio, and as I feel like I aptly said, the ungodly pursuit of ratings. In order to cash in on as many eyeballs or ears as possible, it was in the best interests of these players to get more outlandish, to get more hyper-partisan, to editorialize even further than they were. And as that has happened, the natural reaction is, well, we got to get bigger, we got to get better, we got to get more spectacular. We have to be more outlandish, and I think somebody like Glenn Beck, who has been in the midst of this, he's still very much a right-winger. He's kind of I feel like he's sort of a recovering conservative, a recovering Republican, and starting to lean more libertarian a little bit, for better or worse. But I believe that, he is one of the people that sees that, and, he's made strides to to either atone or to apologize or whatnot for it. We do need to come together, no matter what. No matter what. We need to stop demonizing the other side. And the left is just as bad about it as the right. Both sides are just terrible about this. Nobody wants to listen to each other. If it's an idea that comes from a Republican, all the Democrats hate it. They won't sign off on it. And vice versa. If the Democrat comes up with what is arguably a good idea, the Republicans won't sign off on it because of this hyper-partisan media that will essentially demonize a politician for doing something that is in the best interests of the country, even though, or I should say, they will demonize a politician for doing something that is in line with the opposite side, even though it is what is arguably best for the country and is arguably a bipartisan issue. Net neutrality is really, that's the big one right now, is the net neutrality. Net neutrality is a bipartisan issue. I use bipartisan, I should be using apartisan. It should not be partisan at all. At all. So, it's bipartisan by virtue of being apartisan. Or it should be. So, what you have here is you have a situation where traditionally the FCC was kind of a light touch or hands off, as Agent Pie says. Yeah, it was light touch. There's a lot more to it than that. Now, the growth of broadband was definitely under a light touch doctrine. But what happened was that Verizon wanted to start zero rating services. They wanted to start doing certain things that would impact their bottom line. They wanted to start double dealing. They wanted to start getting money at both ends instead of just getting money from the subscribers, their customers. They also wanted to extort money from web services who were being requested through their pipes, so to speak, their pipes. It's tubes, not a big truck. It is tubes. Anyway, it's a series of tubes. That's an old one right there. Internet is not a big truck. It's tubes. Interweb tubes. So Verizon, AT&T et al., specifically Verizon brought the lawsuit, and so Verizon is sort of the target here. But it was Verizon, it was AT&T, it was T-Mobile, it was Comcast and Charter and Time Warner and all these guys in the broadband sphere. What they wanted to do was they wanted to charge a service for prioritization. Now, paid prioritization, this is sort of what became the crux of what we now think of as net neutrality, at least recently. This paid prioritization issue. Basically, it's unfair. The argument is that it's unfair that an ISP be getting money from their subscribers as well as from who is serving them. So it's akin to it's like double dipping. So like Netflix, for example, because this was like the big test case. People pay for Netflix. People pay for Comcast. People for Comcast internet. Pay their ungodly $80 a month or however much Comcast charges for internet only. They pay for Comcast, and they also pay the $10 a month for Netflix. Well, the $80 a month, that's just not enough. That's just not enough for Comcast to want to do what they want to do. So they're going to charge Netflix too, because they want to get some of that money that Netflix is getting paid. So they want to charge Netflix an extra fee in order to go through the tubes. Otherwise, they're going to slow them down. So the neutrality part is that every bit should be treated equally. It's just first come, first served. Just boom, right through. No prioritization. And to me, that is ideal. That's the ideal of net neutrality. It's just there are no bad bits, there are no slow bits. Everything is going through exactly as it should. Pardon me. But with this pay prioritization issue, that came up, and Verizon wanted to do pay prioritization, and the FCC said, no, you can't do pay prioritization. That would be unfair. That would stifle innovation. That would put larger, more established companies with larger cash bases at an unfair advantage over the use of the internet. So Verizon sued the FCC, and they won. The Supreme Court said that the FCC does not have the legal authority to enact those sorts of rules. Not to enact those sorts of rules, but to enforce those sorts of rules over ISPs, because ISPs are considered information providers, which are classified under Title I of the Telecommunications Act, and not common carriers, which would put them under Title II of the Telecommunications Act. That's your Title I, Title II difference. Now, let's go back a little bit, a little more history here. So we're talking about the early days of the internet. In the early days of the internet, it didn't matter so much because telephone companies were not the internet companies. You just bought your service from AT&T or Bell South or whoever, and then you bought your internet service from AOL or MindSpring or whatever, and the internet service provider, the ISP, all they were doing was they had a whole bunch of modems and a whole bunch of phone lines, and they're essentially acting as a secondary switchboard to simplify it, to really simplify it down to just sort of the nuts and bolts of it. They're basically just acting as another set of switches, another switching station, underneath the telephone company. So you call into them, and their computer calls to another computer, etc., etc., etc. And that's how the internet started. And the telephone companies couldn't do anything about it because they're a common carrier. As a common carrier, they were not allowed to say who could and could not use the legally purchased phone lines and for what purpose. Outside of fraud, fraud investigation to get involved with. To put it another way, if Joe's Pizza, the U-Haul truck next to me, that's like swerving. I've also got a freaking lorry riding my ass. Anyway, so if Joe's Pizza wanted to install 5 phone lines, and then Domino's came in and wanted to pay more money to get Joe's Pizza's calls rerouted to them. Under Title II, they could not. However, under Title I, they technically could. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it works. It works in this case. The telephone companies, they had to connect the lines. That's all that's all they could do. Their job was to connect the call and to service the lines. Everything else was up to the ISP. And then telephone companies wanted to become ISPs, and so they're like, well, we're not going to do this. We're going to do it under a different set of wires, and thus now we won't be subject to the same rules, which is kind of bunk. It's weird, weird and dumb, especially on DSL, because DSL is going through the same copper wires. It's a copper wire system. So that's part and parcel where a lot of the arguments come in. You know, the internet was born under Title II. The internet thrived under Title II. Then broadband came along, reclassified Title I. The internet still thrived under Title I with that light touch regulation. And then we started getting into the maturity of the marketplace. The technology was mature, the marketplace was mature, everybody was kind of settled, you had your monopolies in place, and so now comes the time. Now we're less worried about gaining market share, because we already have our market share. Less worried about market share and more interested in maximizing profits and rent seeking. And that's where we catch up to the story with Verizon versus FCC. So, SCOTUS said that in order to have the legal authority to enforce these light touch regulations, so-called light touch regulations, they would have to be reclassified. They'd have to be classified under Title II as common carriers. And it's a pretty compelling argument, because most everything runs through the internet at this point. Even the fucking telephones run through the internet at this point. POTS systems, plain old telephone systems, POTS, POTS are really, if they still exist, POTS are really just like the final mile, so to speak. It's from the junction box, the end of the street, the end of the block, or whatever. It's pretty much from there to the subscriber, and that's really as far as POTS goes anymore. So the argument is compelling. The argument that the internet is so intertwined with all of commerce at this point that it should be considered a common carrier. The ISPs should be considered common carriers. And because ISPs have a geographical monopoly over their areas, over their respective areas, they absolutely should be regulated as common carriers because there's no competition. If there were competition, if there were real meaningful competition, we wouldn't need it. But there's only two players in every space. It's really one player is dominant over each technology, each version of technology. You have a DSL player from the monopoly telephone company, and then you have your fiber player from the cable company. And, it's either fiber or cable, and DSL or fiber. Either way, there's generally two players in every market, one for each technology, and thus it's not considered a monopoly because there's more than one. However, it acts and works like a monopoly because there is a level of price fixing, there is a level of collusion, and it's jumping. Really, your choices are A or B, and there's no real competition between the two until one sees that they're losing some subscribership, so they're going to lower their prices and do a special introductory offer, and then you basically have to play one against the other, which is shitty. It's stupid. You shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to buy your service on the free market. The way it gets there should be fairly irrelevant. It should just be whose customer service do you want, performance throughput do you want? Who do you want to pay your bill to? That's really what it should be. It should be a utility. The internet is a utility, and that's my opinion as well. That the internet is a utility. Internet connectivity is a utility. There's the argument that Title II has stifled innovation, and that's simply not true, because we have proof that it has not affected infrastructure spending at all. But it's a much bigger problem. It's not a problem that's going to be solved easily. It's not a problem that really should be solved at the FCC level. It's really something that's going to have to go to Congress. It's something that, the argument is why, the argument against Title II is why is the internet, which is a 21st century sort of thing, why is it being governed by a piece of legislation that was written in the 80s, or excuse me, the 30s, 80 years ago, whatever. Why is it being governed by a piece of legislation written in the 30s that could never have foreseen the quantum leap in technology that we have? So I agree with that argument as well. That just means that Congress has to come up with a different set of laws. They've got to come up with something new. Don't try to pigeonhole it. Just fix it. Just fix it. Codify net neutrality. Codify bit neutrality. And while we're at it, why don't we do something about our internet speeds and our level of competition? Because somewhere like Korea, where they have like ridiculous competition for ISP competition, it's ridiculous there. They also have the fastest speeds in the world, by the way. So let's fix that. That's about all I've got today. Follow along on Twitter @AirborneSurfer. You can also check it out, youtube.com/TheAirborneSurfer. And of course, everything is always available 24/7, 366 at airbornesurfer.com. My name is Tari. Thank you for joining me today. Drop your comments in the doobly-doo. This is an open forum. I'm always wanting to hear what you guys think. Tell me I'm wrong, but tell me why. You can't just, you're not allowed to just throw it out there. You're going to have to back up your answers. Well thought out comments are always appreciated. So drop me a line in the doobly-doo. I'll see you all again next week. Until then, tally-ho, y'all.